Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have a special guest. She's a journalist, author, and storyteller, no other than Miss Randy Dunn. Welcome to Book 101, Miss Randy, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Sure. Well, first of all, I am totally jamming to your little song there. I'm enjoying that very much.
Thank you.
But yeah, my name is Randy Dawn. I'm an entertainment journalist. I write for outlets including Variety, the LA Times, the Today Show, all those kind of places. But I am also an author. In fact, being an author was the first thing I always wanted to do. And I have one novel out called Tune In Tomorrow, and I've got three more coming out in 2025. So I am happy to talk about all those things. But the first novel was very much tied into my expertise with the entertainment industry because it was about a reality TV show run by mythical creatures for mythical creatures, but starring humans. So
Wow.
that's kind of where my expertise lies.
Interesting. So, Miss Randy Dunn, thank you so much for sharing your talents to the world.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Big
Yay.
blast, big blast.
Yes. Thank you so much for empowering us. So, what are the key difference between writing a journalist and writing as an author?
Well, I mean, journalism requires or expects at least you to go by factual information. You're supposed to report on things that are happening, or at least your impressions of the things that are happening. Get quotes from people, use those quotes in a fairly literal way. It's much more structured in that sense. Um, and then when it comes to, of course, writing fiction, you can kind of do whatever you want to do. But I'm really very much a fan of finding things in the real world and finding a way to make them into stories or fiction or fictionalized stories. I went some of my favorite articles that I ever wrote were long form articles for outlets like Alternative Press. This is when I was covering the music industry. And they would give me like 4 or 5,000 words, which is, if you haven't written that before, that's a decent amount of space for an article. And what was great about that is I would get time to spend with my subjects. I'd get to see how they worked in the world, how they operated, how they spoke, how they lived. And I wouldn't fictionalize that exactly, but I loved doing something that was called initially new journalism, which was to find a way to create a narrative thread with the facts that you had about your subject. And that was one of my favorite things to write. I wrote an article for Alternative Press about Radiohead, the band, because I went on the road with them for 5 days. And after that 5 days, I had a really good idea of almost how to structure their real lives into a story, even though I wasn't making stuff up. So I like that bridge, that overlap. So when I was doing my fiction, and I became an expert in entertainment and music and TV and film. I thought about, well, that's the thing that you know. They always say, write what you know. So I decided that I would write a fantasy story. If what would the Fae watch if they were going to watch television? If they were going to make movies, what would they make? What would they watch? And I liked bridging that idea of this is sort of how the sausage gets made in television with maybe how fey creatures would create it or work with it or interpret it in some other cases. Um, Two of the books I have coming out next year are not about TV and film and fey, but they are definitely about music and rock and roll and fey creatures. So it all balances out.
Yes, you are most welcome back to promote your book on Book 101 Review. We are looking for that, Mr. Randy. So, how does journalistic writing prioritize accuracy and fact checking?
It's supposed to. When I was first in college and I was studying journalism, I went to Boston University and they have a college of communications there. There was very much an emphasis on you need to go to primary sources, which is the main source who has the information, not just somebody who heard about it or saw it later. The actual primary source as much as possible. And then also use secondary sources to back things up. So there was very much this hierarchy of what is the truth, what is the fact. And as the last, I don't know, decade or so has suggested to us, facts are not necessarily facts. I mean, I don't agree with that, but there's people who seem to think that they get to have their own facts. And the idea of what is truth and what is not truth seems to be very much up in the air in a way that it didn't feel like it was when I was first starting journalism. There's this notion that journalists are supposed to be unbiased, but nobody can ever be 100% unbiased. There's just, it just doesn't exist. As soon as you walk into a room, if the room is the color blue and you hate the color blue, you might feel differently about that room than somebody who feels like they love the color blue. So there's really just no way to be 100% unbiased about everything. What is important is to try to emphasize what the actual truth of the story is what the person you're talking to is either trying to say or means to say. Get to the heart of that, find out what it is that is the story underlying the story. You may talk to a very practiced actor who has given all the answers that they need to give in the past, but there are ways to get beneath the practiced answers and find out what really makes them tick, why they do certain things, why they reacted in certain ways that maybe they even haven't thought about. And you're an interviewer, so I'm sure that you understand how that concept works also. So I think that journalism and accuracy is critical. Finding truth, finding the actual truth beneath the truth, that's the important job of a journalist. It's not just about being, an AI or a computer and spitting out the actual facts. It's about tying things together and seeing what the story is, but being accurate and as close to the reality of what really happened as possible.
So, how do journalists navigate ethical dilemmas when reporting sensitive or controversial stories?
I'm sorry, can you ask the question again?
How do journalists navigate ethical dilemmas when reporting sensitive or controversial stories?
Um, I think every journalist has their own way of doing the navigation. It's a very personal thing, as well as something that your own company that you're writing for, they may have their own specific ethics. When I was in journalism school, there was a teacher who told me, um, if you want to write about the circus, you can't sleep with the lions. And she didn't necessarily mean literally having sex with your interview subjects, but the concept is the same. There's the sense of is something improper going on here? Do you have an improper relationship with your subjects? Are you likely to be more biased or less able to report because you are too close to your subjects? And it's about constantly finding that boundary, because the other thing that a journalist has to do is they have to cultivate their subjects so that subjects will feel confident and comfortable with telling them things that they might not say otherwise. So you have to, on the one hand, bring somebody into your confidence. On the other hand, you have to be willing to separate, this is my good friend who I'm talking about versus this is the subject of my article. And that's something that everybody navigates differently. And you can make the argument that, say, for example, the White House press corps is a little too close to whoever happens to be in charge of the country at any given time, because they are an exclusive group that's invited into a room where other people are not. And they have to make sure that they can be invited back into that room. Meanwhile, then there's the outlets you may be writing for. I write for the Today Show website, and the Today Show is connected to NBC News. So they have a very high bar for what we're allowed to quote, what we're allowed to report. If we're going to talk about, for example, a crime story that maybe has a movie on Netflix, and we're going to write a little explainer story about what's the real story behind this, we have to make sure that all the things that we're quoting are actually either already been pre-reported elsewhere, or we get our own original reporting. And they have lawyers and everybody who goes through it and makes sure that everything is to their standards. There's a whole thing called standards and practices. And if that doesn't work for them, they'll make you take it out. So the navigation aspect of it is really very personal, but also about your business. And as I think people who go into journalism, who become reporters, who actually study the subject, the goal is hopefully that you have this inner compass that lets you know when you're crossing a line or you're going beyond what a journalist should do. I remember years ago there was an article in Rolling Stone where a woman had interviewed Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys. And not only did she put herself in the story, like, oh, I saw this, I did that, which I'm not a fan of doing that. She talked about, oh, and then we all got in the hot tub together. And I'm like, what are you doing in a hot tub with your subjects? Like, this just did your compass not go off at this point? So it's that's another thing that a reporter has to look out for is to make sure that they don't get so close to their subjects in that way, but also that they don't make themselves the subject of the story. If you become the subject of the story, you're no longer the reporter. You can't be both.
Very well said, Miss Randy. Very well said. So, how does your writing style evolve from journalistic work to creative writing?
Um, well, the thing is that, as I mentioned a little earlier, I've always wanted to be a fiction writer first. I was writing fiction when I was writing about my stuffed animals and I was 8 years old and they were all having these dramatic adventures and I would write the story and I'd illustrate it. So I've kind of been doing that all my life, but I've also been hyper aware that getting paid for fiction is really, really difficult and most people do not make a living at it. So I thought early on, what can I do that I would enjoy doing as a profession, but would also allow me to write? And there is the argument that maybe you should have a profession that has nothing to do with writing so that when you get to your fiction, you feel fresh about it. But for me, I just loved writing enough that I thought, okay, well, what can I do? And I spoke to my mom and I'm like, Mom, I love writing. What can I do? She's like, you could be a journalist. And I'm like, what is a journalist? And so she explained it to me. And then I started pursuing journalism. I was on the high school paper and then I went to college to study journalism. And that just provided a way for me to make money, to get paid, but I also realized over the years what it did for me is it taught me how to be edited. It taught me how to be concise, how to understand if somebody says they need 500 words on something or 1,000 words on something, what that story looks like. Because it's not just about sitting down and looking at the word count and all of a sudden, oh, I hit 1,000, I'm done. There's a whole shape to a story that you have to create. And then you have to be edited by somebody taking a look at it later and saying, okay, you missed this, you got that right, or fix this. And that helps you sort of develop, I won't say a shell exactly, but a little bit of a callus that makes you understand the editing is going to make the story better. That just because you wrote it doesn't mean it's 100% perfect immediately as soon as it comes out of your pen or off your keyboard. And that really helped me once I had fiction that I wanted to show around to people because I understood the value of editing and critique and criticism in a way that I might not have if I had not first gone into journalism. So it's more about a technique and a craft. But then also, like I was mentioning earlier, about learning how to tell a story based on things that you observe in the world, how to tie things together, how to see connections. That really helps when you're starting to craft a story too, because you want to make sure that there's the story that people are reading, but then there's also metaphors and style and layers underneath all of that. So
So,
yeah, that I'm sorry, go ahead.
go ahead. So, speaking of creative writing, can you tell us is this your latest book, Tune In Tomorrow?
Yes, so Tuna Tomorrow actually came out in 2022 originally. Um, Solaris published it. It did great. And then they liked it so much that they said, we want two more books from you from this same universe. And I was like, great. And they said, what we're going to do is we're going to take Tuna Tomorrow. We're going to give you a new cover and we're going to reissue it. And so this is actually the second cover that has ever existed for Tune In Tomorrow. And I loved the original, but I think I love this one even better. It just speaks to me. So yes, Tune In Tomorrow is the one about the reality TV show run by mythical creatures, for mythical creatures, but starring humans. And it's a lot of backstage shenanigans and how the sausage gets made in reality TV slash soap operas. So yes, that is my first novel. I've had a lot of short stories, and I also co-wrote a book about the television show Law and Order SVU. So I have that out as well. But this is my first novel, and I'm so happy that it's out again. And then the next one in this universe will be out next fall. So I'm excited about that too.
Yes. I'm inviting you again to come back and let's promote this book of yours.
Love to.
And what are your challenges when you're writing Tune In Tomorrow?
Um, well, the thing about Tune In Tomorrow is that I don't traditionally, or I have not traditionally written funny or humorous fiction. I have written some funny things in the past, and people said, "Oh, you should write funny," and I'm like, it's very hard to write funny if if you're being required to do it. But I had two other books that hadn't really found a home to be published, and my agent said to me, maybe you should try something a little different. And I came up with this idea of a fantasy reality show, and I thought, well, that has to be a little bit silly. It's going to be hard to write that in a really serious vein. And once I sort of turned on the humorous taps, I found it was I could throw in all the stuff that makes me laugh. I mean, the humor in this book is not deeply sophisticated. It is punny, it is silly, it is dad jokey. And that is the kind of stuff that makes me laugh. And I think if I can make myself laugh, somebody else out there must be laughing. So the challenge really was to say, hey, you get to be funny now. You don't have to be super serious, trying to be literary. You don't have to, um, you know, jump all the hurdles that I think go into much more serious fiction. Humor is hard to write in its own way, but it was an interesting shifting of gears for me to get to Tune In Tomorrow. Um, and then it kind of flowed pretty quickly. There I had at least one section that I had to rewrite, but basically it kind of looks the way that it did in its original form in the final version of the book, which I'm very happy about.
Yes, 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 yes. I love Law and Order. Can you tell us the story behind of this story?
Definitely. So I am a huge Law and Order fan also. I started watching it when I first started freelancing, and it was on like at 11 o'clock at night. And I'm like, that's a good time to take a break. I'll just watch the show. And I had a big
Yes.
crush on Chris Noth and all of that. So I went from that, and then a friend of mine and I started doing a little fanzine online where we included fan fiction about Law and Order and articles about Law and Order. And at the same time, I was also doing freelance writing for the Hollywood Reporter, and I started doing a lot of Law and Order coverage because I was in New York, the show was in New York, and there were all these reasons to do articles. So I kind of melded these two things, and a book called The Law and Order Unofficial Companion by Susan Green and Kevin Courier came out, and I was like, I should interview them. So I interviewed them for this little newsletter my friend and I put together. And we hit it off, we kept in touch. And when Susan Green wanted to do the Law and Order SVU Unofficial Companion, Kevin wasn't interested, and she came to me and said, "Hey, do you want to write this with me?" And I was like, "Yes." And the really cool thing is that they had an in with Dick Wolf, who created the show. And Dick Wolf said, yes, I'll write you a forward. I'll give you carte blanche on the set. You can come in and talk to anybody. I'll let everybody know they need to talk to you. So he really opened all of these doors. Now, the nice thing is that by calling it the unofficial companion, it means that like NBC never had to show up and, say, you can't say this. But at the same time, it really was kind of official because Dick Wolf gave us opened all those doors and let us go in. And again, wrote the forward. So we had access, but we didn't have to worry about pleasing the suits. And there's nothing in there that we really wrote that's negative, but vice presidents and executives all get nervous about all sorts of things. So the book came out in 2009, and we have the first 12 seasons in there covered. There's a whole episode guide. We talked to all the actors, a lot of the recurring people, how the show got put together. And when it came out, we were saying to ourselves, I guess we'll have to do a little addendum in another year or two, see if we can add in an extra chapter because this show is certainly not going to last, 13 or 14 seasons. And here we are. And I think it's now in season 26 or something. I mean, it's
Yes.
the longest running show on television.
Like yes,
It
like the other series. That one I think both together the longest series. I love Law and Order.
Oh,
S-
yes. Fabulous.
Definitely. So do you think there's a follow up for this book?
I don't there should be,
There
but
should be,
I
yeah.
don't think so, only because it's been a couple of years, but I asked the person who does press for Dick Wolf, and I said, "Hey, would he let us do the second half of the season? Like, we've got 12 seasons, let's do whatever come next." And he was very focused on all of his Chicago shows, Chicago Fire, Chicago PD, all of those shows. And the answer was no, he's not really interested in doing that right now, which wouldn't stop me from doing it. But again, having that access, if we don't have that access, it's kind of hard. And the second part of it is that the internet has exploded in a way since 2009 that we just didn't have before. There's whole Law and Order wikis, and there's ways to get the information that we would be putting into a book anyway. So it's not as valuable. And unfortunately, Susan Green passed away a couple of years ago. So my writing partner would not be here with me. I'd have to find somebody else who'd want to do it with me. But
Oh,
you know, if we had the access, I could see doing a Kickstarter. So I think
why
we would
not?
get money from a Kickstarter, but we'd
Oh,
have to
yes.
get that access. So that's the critical thing.
Oh, yes. Why not? I'm thinking about Grey's Anatomy. I think they are both longer series
They are. I
nowadays.
want to say Grey's Anatomy is like in the double digits, maybe up to 20 or something, but I know that like Law and Order SVU started in 1999, and I think Grey's Anatomy came after that, but they're both
Mhm.
super long. I mean, we
Yes.
don't have those kind of shows anymore that go for like double digit seasons. It just doesn't happen anymore.
Yes. We need to create those series too, like probably your book.
I think we're starting to see maybe a swing around back to the traditional broadcast model. I mean, SVU, Grey's Anatomy, a couple other shows, they're still doing 20, 22 episodes a year, right? Like that's how it always was for decades past. It's not until cable and streaming really got involved that we started seeing these very short seasons. Doing 22 episodes is huge, and you have to have some sort of subject that maybe is episodic that people will want to tune into week after week. And I think some shows are starting to do that again, whether or not they're doing the 22 episodes. There's a show called Elspeth I really like, and the new Matlock is a lot of fun. Yeah, they don't ask a lot of you. It's not literary television, but it's easy to digest and it's a lot of fun and it's crime solving. So I'm into that.
Yes. So, Miss Randy, what will be your advice for those people out there want to be a journalist, want to be an author or storyteller?
Well, I would say it's two different things at this point. If you want to be a journalist, I would actually say don't go to school to study journalism. It's not that you can't learn anything, but if you study journalism as your major, like I did, and you get out of school with a degree in journalism, what you have is an expertise in writing. What will serve you better is if you say get a degree in business or political science or a particular subject that you can be an expert in, and then you could minor in journalism or you could just start writing journalism. I mean, you don't have to have a degree to do this, right? But if you have this expertise ahead of time, so that you have this depth of knowledge, then you'll be able to write about something that other people who are just coming out of J school won't necessarily have. So I started getting paid as a journalist while I was still in college. So there's proof that you don't have to have the degree to get a journalism gig. So that's for journalism. I would say if you want to do that, start taking the initiative, get an expertise, and then find places that want you to write about it. As for being an author, there is a similarity in that you just kind of have to start doing it. You can't expect that it's going to happen overnight. You can't expect that it's going to make you any money. Both of those things may happen, but those are not typical. You'll see a couple of people who get really big contracts, and even then they're not making a ton of money. If I got paid $100,000 to write a book, the book maybe took me 3 years to write, and my agent's going to get 15% and I have to pay taxes on it. So all of a sudden that $100,000 shrinks quite a bit, right? Like over 3 years even if nobody took stuff out, it would only be $33,000 a year, right? So writing is not going to pay most people. So you have to do it because you want to do it. And if you
Yes.
really want to do it, regardless, do a little bit every day, whether it's researching or thinking about it or crafting an outline or putting words on a page. All of that I think counts as writing, but try and do a little bit every day because I find if I stop doing any of that, the muse in my head just sort of goes to sleep. Then you got to wake her up again. But if you
Mm.
poke her a lot, she'll always be awake and she'll be ready to give you ideas and words will come to you much more readily, I think. So doing a little bit every day will keep that muse entertained.
Definitely. And stop procrastinating, people. If you have the passion to write, write, and share to the world, like Miss Brandy Dunn. So, what is your short term and long term goals in writing?
Well, my short term goals are I will have edits for the follow up to tune in tomorrow. The follow up is called We Interrupt This Program. Those edits are supposed to be coming in the beginning of the new year. I've just turned in my edits for the book that's coming out in April, which is called The Only Song Worth Singing. That's the rock and roll and Faye book. And we are starting to work on the cover for the book that's coming out in August called Leave No Trace, which again is more musicians and Fae. So I've just been drawing up some ideas for the cover on that one right now. So those are all the sort of short term goals. The long term goal is that I've got a whole nother book in the Tune in Tomorrow universe to write. I need to do that next year. And I have two other novels that are in various stages of completion that I'm hoping will get picked up by a publisher. So with luck, I can keep books coming out for the next several years before I have to think about starting from scratch. But the thing is, I love the Tune in Tomorrow universe, and I'm hoping to be able to write more books beyond even what the contract says right now in that universe, or maybe even just short stories. Some of the characters are a lot of fun, and being able to meld fantasy with television is something that continues to tickle me.
Looking forward for more books to come, Miss Randy, and good luck to your goals. So to sum up our discussion, how do both journalists and authors handle criticism and feedback on their stories or work?
Oh, we hate it. We hate all of it. How dare you question? No. Um, so with a journalist, you need assuming it's professional feedback or professional criticism, it's good to take that information in and see if it's valid and see if it works for you to improve your story next time. Maybe there are some things that you missed. None of us are perfect. None of us can get it all right the first time. Somebody may come to you and just say, "Hey, you pronounced this name right. You pronounced this name wrong. Excuse me." And that's another thing that you can learn. Uh, in a way that also can apply to being an author, but you need to understand that not everything everybody tells you is something that you have to fix. Just because you show something, a story to somebody and they say, "This didn't work for me." That's true. It didn't work for them. That doesn't mean it doesn't work, right? I mean, we don't love every single book we pick up. But if you hear criticism from several people who say that exact same thing didn't work for them, then it's time to look and say, all right, that thing probably needs to be tweaked because I'm missing the audience now. So it's kind of about crowdsourcing in a way. You show the book to your friends, you show your book to your loved ones, and then you show it to people who don't have an emotional investment in your well-being and who will give you the hard truths. And you distill all of that into, all right, so this part really is not working. This character is not making sense. These are the things I need to fix based on what everybody has told me. So, and the more you do that, the more receptive to criticism you can be because you understand that it's a feedback process. It's not a you don't know how to write. It's a this thing needs to maybe be tweaked to make it a better story. So it's about being able to listen to what people say isn't working for them. But if they tell you how to fix it, like, oh, this is what I think you should do, put that to the side. There's nothing wrong with thinking about it, but they don't necessarily know the story like you do. So you don't necessarily have to take their idea of how to fix it into serious consideration.
Miss Randy Dunn, thank you so much for being journalist, author, and storyteller, and
Thank you very much.
continue to empowering us. So, Miss Randy, can you please invite our listeners to support all your books, your upcoming books?
Please do. Yes, I have a bunch of books coming out of different types, different styles, different tones. You can find them all on randydawn.com. Everything that I'm doing is there. There's a newsletter, so come on and find me and look me up. And I'm happy to talk to about you about my work wherever you may find me.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Randy Dunn because if you support her, more empowering books to come. So, Miss Randy, thank you for your time.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me here.
More to come, people. See you soon. So, Mr. Brandy, if
Yes.
you want to